What up, guys? It's Dragon Ball for Life here. Today, I want to go in depth about lifting strength versus striking strength. Now, I talked about this in one of my other videos. I forgot what it was, but I was talking about that I'm going to be making more videos about debating in general and certain topics. Oh, it was my feats and statements video. In that video, I was talking about debating is far more complex and there's some more intricacies to it, and there's quite a bit of controversial topics that we have where people don't really agree on. And the feats and statement was the first one. This is going to be the second one. And I want to talk about lifting strength and striking strength. Now, what is lifting strength and striking strength? Well, lifting strength is basically how much a person can lift and throw, whereas striking strength is how hard a person can hit, either through a punch, a kick, an elbow, or a knee, or even a headbutt. So there's more complexities to it than lifting. And the reason why I say this is because there's a ton of people, when they do debates and say this character could be that character, usually what they do is they bring up feats of strength of them lifting up a ridiculous amount of weights or throwing a ridiculously heavy object or whatever, and they're like, that's how strong they are. But that is strength in lifting, not in a fight. Because if you know anything about fighting, and if you watch fighting in general, and I'm pretty sure UFC fighters and boxers can tell you this too, that just because somebody can lift a certain amount of weight doesn't mean that they can hit with a certain amount of power. Like, for example, a bodybuilders and powerlifters can lift a ton of weight, and that's what they normally do. But a boxer, most of them don't even lift weights, and even if they do, they're not lifting insanely high amount of weights, especially compared to these guys, but they can hit way harder. There's no way you can tell me that a bodybuilder hits harder than, a boxer. Boxers in general hit harder, and there's reasons to that. And in this video, I want to go in depth in explaining that and the actual science of fighting and using strength in a fight. So just because a character can lift a ton of weight or throw a heavy amount of weight doesn't mean they can hit that hard. And I do agree 100% that striking strength is what matters in a fight, not lifting strength. And I want to go into that. Now, the reason why lifting heavy weights doesn't equate to hitting with a high amount of power is the technique in which you do it. When you're lifting weights, you're basically either pulling or pushing an object, and you're going either in slow motion, like you raise it up, and then you lower it down, the weight. And that's how you basically do lift up weights. Whereas, throwing a punch or kick, it's more of a snapping motion. So like you throw like that, like you're throwing a jab like that, or you're throwing a hook like that, or an uppercut like that. You're basically whipping your arm and you're rotating your body with it. And the amount of the muscles that you're using in different certain weightlifting will work on different muscle groups in different ways. And you can lift weights to increase your strength in other areas, like if you work on your forearms or your triceps. When you throw a punch at something, usually the force comes back. So if you punch like a punching bag, the amount of force that you're generating hitting the punching bag will be resent through your body, going think of it as a shockwave going through your forearm, hitting your traps, and then going through your shoulder joint. That's how it works. So to minimize yourself from being hurt while throwing a punch or take less damage is to toughen up your forearm or your triceps. So you can do tricep workouts, forearm workouts, and you can strengthen it and build muscle upon it, and that muscle can basically protect you. And you can work on other parts of your body to strengthen different types of striking, like your jab or your hook or your uppercut. And some people might say, well, there you have it. Lifting weights does help out, and it does. But the way somebody lifts weights, like somebody who lifts weights for fighting, is different still than somebody who lifts weights for bodybuilding or powerlifting. People who lift weights for fighting compared to bodybuilders, they're trying to gain a maximum muscle growth. So they're usually doing heavy weights, low reps. So 3 to 5 reps in with a heavy weight. Whereas fighters, they're trying to do strength and conditioning, and for strength and conditioning is different than muscle growth. And the way you achieve that is lower weights, higher reps. So, fighters like boxers and MMA fighters, they don't really need to go to the gym and lift heavy weights. They just need to lift moderately to, I guess, even if they want to high weights, but they have to put in a ton of reps. That way, their it will grow, but it'll be more effective on their strength itself. That's what they're really trying to focus on. So you can get bigger muscles, but just bigger muscles in general doesn't mean you're going to hit harder. And lifting bigger weights doesn't mean that you're going to strike harder either. You can use weightlifting to, help your body from getting damaged from throwing a punch or deliver more power in a punch, but lifting heavy weights doesn't really equate to that as much. And so that's like more of a scientific base to that. But I also want to explain the fact that even about like striking strength in general, because people take it as, well, this character destroyed a planet with a punch or was able to hurt an opponent that tanked, let's say, a supernova, and the fact that they're able to damage them meant that their physical power was either equivalent to a supernova or past it, depending on if they one-shotted that opponent. So yeah, that's how they do it, and I agree with that, but I think there's more to it, because depending on what part, there's quite a bit of things. One is the technique that they use, two is the body part that they use to hit the person with, and three is the part that they hit the person with in a body part, of we're equating it through them attacking somebody instead of just, an inanimate object like a planet or a star or whatever. So that first, let's talk about the technique. Depending on what type of technique you're doing, you can generate different amount of power. If you're throwing in a jab, the amount of power is going to be far less than any other punch you can throw. Jabs are usually light ones. They're for setting up shots, and they're usually for distracting your opponent and sometimes getting points. But jabs in general don't hurt as much compared to a cross. And then we have the more heavy hitting punches, such as a hook, an uppercut, or overhand right. Those ones generate more force because you're putting your weight and more momentum into it. You're pushing on forward all your weight and momentum into that punch, and you're basically shifting and twisting all these muscles in congruent conjunction together to generate that amount of power. So even in that, it's different. So it really depends. Did that person, were they throwing jabs? Were they throwing a cross? Were they throwing a hook? Because depending on what it is, the amount of power that they would be able to deliver would fluctuate depending on the style that they're doing. And then two, what part of their body are they hitting with? When you throw a punch, it does have a lot of power, but our elbows can deliver even more power and actually have an extra effect of cutting. So when you see somebody getting elbowed, you would see more cutting on their faces than if somebody would get punched. And there's more power to generate in an elbow. And the same thing with a kick and a knee. Kicks are usually far stronger than punches. If you kick somebody in the head, even if it's a more light tap like this, you can knock somebody out. If you hit somebody with a kick like that, you can knock them out. You can generate way more power with a kick than a punch, because there's countless times in a fight where people are throwing punches, even hard punches to somebody in the face, and they take it even if they didn't block it. Like, let's say they didn't block correctly or on time, and they found an opening, hit them straight in the face. They can still tank that. But when it's a kick, even if it's blocked, sometimes it can be very damaging. And kicks, if you've seen any martial arts, like for example, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, he talked about, to knock somebody out with a kick, you really don't need to generate that much power. Just a little bit like a tap like that can knock them out. So even lighter taps from a kick can knock somebody out, whereas a hard punch might sometimes knock them out, especially if you hit them right in the chin, but most likely you won't knock somebody out with one shot with a punch, whereas a kick, you can definitely do that. So your kicks are stronger, your knees are definitely stronger, your elbows are stronger, and they have different things to it. So it also depends on what part of their body they hit them with, also what part of their bodies they use, because there's some people there's some fictional characters that are, more basic. They just throw punches, whereas there's other characters that use kicks, elbows, knees. Those characters are going to be far more lethal in a fight than a guy who can throw punches, Because let's say that guy, he throws punches harder than the other guy. The other guy, he even if he doesn't throw a punch as hard as the other guy they're facing, he could just go to kicks and elbows and knees, which would generate even more power. So he wouldn't even technically need to be stronger puncher than the other person. He would just need to be like using his other body parts that can generate more power as long as he can do it. So if opponent over there's a character that has stronger punches, but they can only punch, and they're against a character that has weaker punches, but knows how to kick and elbow and knee, they would be doing more damage because they will use parts of their body that can generate more force without them needing to generate more force. So that's also to take in fact. And then the third thing of you're calculating them taking on an opponent, it depends on where they hit them. There are weak spots of a person, the bridge of the nose, right here in the chin. You can knock somebody out. You can cause some concussion because of whiplash. You do this, you make the head whip like this, the brain smacks around in the head and increase scar tissue in the brain, basically giving them concussions and CTE. And you can hit them in the solar plexus, knocking the wind out of them. You can hit them in the liver, where you can rupture it and make them bleed, have internal bleeding and pee out blood. And also liver blows are one of the hardest. You can hit them in the blow area right here in the rib cage, where it's lighter, and if you hit them there, you can shatter the rib cage. So it also depends on where you hit them, and that's why I feel like striking in general is far more complex, because the amount of strength you're going to get is going to fluctuate due to the technique they're going to use, where they hit them, because they can hit them in a weaker spot and not have to generate as much as power, but still hurt them easy. So it also depends on how good they are as a fighter and know where to hit the opponent. If they're just like, basic and just going for punches to the head and not really thinking about where to aim, they're not going to be, they're not going to be as lethal in a fight than somebody who can do that, even if they're not as physically stronger than the other person who can do that. And so there's many things in that aspect in regard. Also, another thing I think people need to take in consideration when it comes to strength in general when you're hitting somebody, whether it's lifting strength or hitting strength, is fatigue and stamina. Depending on how much stamina you have, when you start off in a fight, and the higher stamina you have, the harder you can hit. You can throw more harder punches. But as the fight progresses and the more your stamina drains, especially if you have bad stamina and your stamina is low, your punches are going to be hitting weaker and weaker and weaker. So that's also another thing to take in consideration when you're doing these debates. And you're saying, this character fighting against this character, look at their stamina. Who has the better stamina? Because whoever has the better stamina would mean that they can punch with a heavier, more amount of force longer than the other person. So that also matters in these debates, because just because some character can hit harder, let's say they have bad stamina compared to the other person, the more their stamina goes down, the weaker their punches and kicks would be. So if they're fighting a character, if they have a higher strength, if the character has more stamina than them, or they're more strategic and able to make them waste their stamina, their punches and their kicks would soon get weaker. So the strength wouldn't stay in that top level throughout the entire fight. It will start to decrease and lower. So just because they can hit with, let's say, 100 tons of force with their punches, throughout the fight, it will go less and less than 100. It won't stay consistently 100. They're not going to be like completely drained of stamina and throwing 100 tons of force still. They're going to be throwing fractions of that, and it's going to lessen and lessen. So that's also another thing to take into consideration when it comes to these debates and who would win in a fight, is who can maintain that level of strength longer and who can throw more harder hitting shots. Also, it really depends on how fast the person can throw shots. Because if a character can, like, let's say, has more power, but they throw only a couple of shots in, whereas the other person might hit weaker, but they can throw hundreds of shots in, then even if they're weaker, when you multiply by the volume of strikes that they're throwing, it will over equate the amount of power that they have, as long as they're able to keep it on the outside and not get hit with these big shots that will take them out. So that's also to take in consideration. So yeah, this is far more complex than a lot of people think it is, because if you know fighting in general, you would know it's complex. And yes, these are fictional characters we're talking about, but these, real life examples would also apply to their battles in general too. So the important thing to take from this is the the strength that it takes to lift weights and heavy weights is different than the strength it takes to throw a punch or a kick. They're not the same thing. They're not equivalent. And even when we do striking in general, saying this character can hit this hard, you need to be specific about what type of what type of attacks are they throwing, what type of punches were they throwing, kicks, knees, elbows. These certain types of attacks you would throw would have different levels and degrees of power. Where did they hit them in the body part? There can be weaker body parts, so they probably weren't generating as much as power. They were hitting in a softer spot, or what part of their body were they hitting with? Were they kicking? Because if they're kicking, then that would generate more power. You can't say that when there's strike strength, you can't say it's equivalent throughout their entire body. You would have to go through how hard could they hit with their punches, how hard could they hit with their kicks, their knees, their elbows, their head over they do a headbutt. So there's that also to take into consideration. Then also it's the stamina. How long can they maintain that level of destructive power? As the fight goes on and as their stamina starts to deplete, the weaker their punches and their attacks would be. And then also the amount of volume that they're able to send out in a fight. How many punches and kicks are they able to throw in a fight? If they're not able to throw as much as the other opponent, then the other opponent, through just sheer volume, even if they're weaker, can win in a fight. Also, how strategic are they in a fight? Are they one of those people that are rash and just jump into it and get into a close combat against a stronger opponent and just get knocked out? Or are they more strategic and stay on the outside and do more defensive and tactical moves where they go in and out that can also help them out in the fight? So there's a lot of more intricacies to strength itself. And hopefully, hopefully this wasn't too confusing or too over the place. I try to make it as structured as possible, and I try to make it understandable, easy enough for people to understand, even people who don't know fighting in general, because I feel like it's far more complex than people think it is, and it really requires quite a bit of afterthought into it. So I hope you like this video, and have a good day.